Oh, there you are.
Got him.
Welcome, Dick.
Welcome.
Good to see you guys. How many people do we have with us?
Yeah, thanks for being here.
It looks like about 15, 16.
I got
Okay,
16 on the count, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, before we get started with anything, please, my abject apologies for standing you all up the last time. That was really stupid on my part. I was ready to do it, and I was home, but I was just walking around doing nothing. So I'm sorry about that.
No worries. We appreciate the reschedule and how hospitable you've been this whole time about getting on this call. So especially because you're traveling right now. Is that correct?
Well, I'm in Fort Collins. You know, this is one of our places. So I was traveling. I was in Europe for the last month. I was in Italy and Austria. But we're back now. But yeah, we're just in Fort Collins. We're here doing some New Belgium and Colorado State stuff that Kim has scheduled. So plus there was the big announcement yesterday about the bells and all that. So that's also in the air.
Yeah, big announcement for sure. Well, to respect Dick's time, I don't think I need to do any really introduction whatsoever, since we're all here and we kind of know who he is and what he's been up to. So thank you all for being here. We're definitely going to hand it right over to Dick just to kind of give us a background of what he's been up to. Like, we've got plenty of questions posed for you, Dick, that we'll definitely just start jumping in, but just kind of roll with like, what took you to start to like IPAs and what was why IPAs and like, your prowess with the whole style?
Well, still, you know, so many of my brewing compatriots these days are saying, all I want to drink is Pilsners, but I'm like, no, all I want to drink is IPA. And that's not entirely true, but I do, that's kind of my go-to beer. And I don't know, I thought maybe I would start with a little bit of a history of me and IPA, you know, because I started home brewing back in the 80s. And, you know, back in those days, there wasn't a lot going on IPA wise. You know, we were all sort of emulating British beer styles and getting whatever ingredients and recipes and whatever else we could just to sort of get our sort of fledgling hobbyist careers going. And then, of course, many of us went on to become professional brewers. But you know, back in those days, you know, I moved to Seattle in 1990, and I'll get to that part. But before that, you know, I started homebrewing when I was living in Boston, the Boston area. And also having traveled in Britain and all that kind of stuff. And I think, you know, back then, you know, the so-called IPAs that you would run into, I call them sort of insincere evocation, you know, like their Bass made what they called an IPA that was the Charrington's IPA or whatever. And it was like 4% alcohol, you know, and when they'd serve it to you, they'd say, oh, be careful, it's 4%. But, you know, and you know, okay, that's fine. They felt that there was enough sort of positive association with the style moniker to bring it out and get people interested in it. And then, you know, of course, you know, we all know that, you know, Liberty Ale is arguably one of the, you know, the first, you know, sort of American craft IPA that was made. But at the time, they didn't necessarily call it an IPA. They just used a bunch of hops. And, you know, it's a good beer, of course, but by today's standards, you know, it's not really very hoppy and all that. But it was certainly a step in the right direction. And then, you know, I didn't actually have to move to Washington to first have the Grant's version of what they called IPA. And of course, Bert was a hop merchant and he was always, you know, touting, you know, the use of a whole lot of hops in his beers and all that kind of stuff. But honestly, that IPA wasn't very good. You know, many of the Grant's beers weren't all that great, but, you know, we owe him a great debt for what he did for, you know, Washington craft brewing and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, it was mainly just an excuse to put the Taj Mahal on the label. But anyway, so after homebrewing in the Boston area for about a year, I moved to Seattle and I got a job at a brew pub on Lower Queen Anne. And, you know, IPA was not really sort of in our plans. In fact, it was not something that occurred to most people, although at the time, there was a really good IPA that was available intermittently at the Big Time Brewery, where I later worked. But at that point, it was Ed Tringali was running that place, the Bhagwan's Best. And that was for the day, it was a very hoppy beer. And it was very popular. Whenever it was on, it sold out, really quickly. What?
It won medals.
I'm not sure it won medals.
It did.
Kim is kibitzing over from the other side of the room. Yeah, the Bhagwans won medals. But anyway, so that was intermittently available at the brew pub. And then after I worked at the Duamps job that I had on Lower Queen Anne, I went to work at Pike Place Brewery. And while I was there, we were allowed to come up with an IPA. And I'm pretty sure it was the first production IPA available in the Seattle area, on an ongoing basis. We packaged it. And so we brewed that beer. I don't remember. Well, I do remember something about the malt, but it had some, dextrin malt and that kind of stuff. And we used all Maris Otter in those days. That differentiated us. So it was kind of chewy, but still, I remember we had to get a special dispensation from Charles, the owner, to use Chinook hops because he, prior to that, we'd used nothing but English hops. But, Chinook was like, he hated Cascade because Bert loved Cascade. So, these were the waters that we navigated back in those days. And, we were able to use Chinook because we got special permission from Charles. It was the first time a Pike Place beer, and I call it Pike Place because back then it was called the Pike Place Brewery. Later it was Pike Brewing. It was all English hops before that. So we used we got him to agree to use the Chinook. And we also used to hang a bag of oak chips in the conditioning tank to try to synthesize some of the whole sort of oak treatment that traditionally, was believed that IPAs had. And it was endlessly annoying to us because people would say, oh yeah, it's got diacetyl in it. It's like, you've never tasted an oak beer before. It's not diacetyl, it's oak. But I do feel like I need to sort of step aside for a moment and say that, the whole story of the origins of IPA, it's the tiresome story. Whenever I read, on a website or in somebody's promotional materials about the IPA they make, and they trot out that story about shipping it to India and blah, 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 I stop reading. Because it's like, we've heard that endlessly. It's the tiresome story. And then there's the tiresome refutation of the tiresome story. The people who say, oh no, that's not exactly what happened, but they have no better legs to stand on than the people who tell the original story. So I don't know where we are with that. But anyway, so we were allowed to use Chinook in that beer. And then, then I went on to work at Big Time and I brewed the Bhagwan's Best. And that was one of the recipes that I didn't touch at all when I went in there because it was a really good beer. And we brewed other IPAs too, the Scarlet Fire, which went on to be various other things at various other breweries. And then I started Elysian. And so my first thought with IPA brewing at Elysian was that I didn't think I needed to brew something quite as strong as what the other IPAs that I had come in contact with were. And I was wrong, but that was my first idea. So I thought, I'm gonna make more like a 5.5% IPA, something pretty hoppy, but I want the hops to shine through. And that didn't last all that long. And gradually the alcohol kept creeping up because it is a really important constituent, of course, of the flavor and of the character of the beer. So then as I developed that beer, and that was the Immortal IPA, which once again, for the time was fairly hoppy, but within a couple of years wasn't that hoppy at all. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because I lost and all I was looking at was an icon for a second.
I think everybody's on mute, but yeah, you're here.
Okay. So, I developed the later version of the Immortal, and it was, the three C's, it was Cascade, Centennial, Chinook. And, once again, I feel like I have to step aside and, Cascade, the development Cascade, I'll talk in a minute or two about, how, the development of the fruity hop varieties made so much of what later went on with craft beer and very hoppy beers, and especially IPA possible. But, Cascade had been developed, well, a long time ago, but the big brewers weren't all that interested in it. But as those of us who were starting home brewing and craft, small scale professional brewing back in those days, we seized on that hop because it had a lot of character and it differentiated the beer that we were accustomed to drinking, just the industrial American beer, from the beers that we wanted to make, that we wanted to have more flavor and all that. So that's Cascade. But the thing I love about the Centennial story is that, that was a hop that was developed for the bigger brewers by the bigger brewers. And once it was a fact, once it actually existed and could be used, something that craft brewers seized on and home brewers seized on. But once again, the big brewers weren't all that into it. And in those days, they called all the shots about the development of hop varieties and what was going to be cultivated and what wasn't. And their word was like, let's stop cultivating. We're not going to help the craft brewers. They like it, but we don't like it. So let's stop growing it. And it was a secret project. And some of you probably know this story, but Ralph Olson, who's now long retired from Hop Union, was pretty much single-handedly the one who kept Centennial going. It didn't have a name yet. I remember when I was brewing with it at Big Time, it didn't have a name yet. It was called CFJ 90. And there were three, and that was the code name that he had given it to justify continuing to grow it, because nobody knew what CFJ 90 meant. And I don't remember the name of the three guys, but it was C, F, and J were three guys who were sort of behind the cultivation of that hop. And so he kept it going with that sort of code name. And we still have it today, thanks to his advocacy of it in the face of bigger brewers' opposition to its continued cultivation. So that's kind of a neat story.
Nice.
And then, of course, Chinook, we're familiar with that too. But so anyway, so Immortal, we brewed that with those three hops. And then when Amarillo came along, I fell in love with Amarillo, and I incorporated a lot of Amarillo into that beer. And that, Amarillo was sort of the beginning of the interesting new fruity hop varieties that suddenly became available. Well, it wasn't sudden. Amarillo was a big thing that was developed by the Virgil Gamache Farms, and everybody just had to get on board with Amarillo, and there was only a limited quantity of it, and it ran out every year. And then, of course, various other hop varieties came along that everybody fell in love with, over the next several years, Mosaic and Citra and Simcoe. And although I was never much of a Simcoe fan myself, though I do love a lot of beers that incorporate it in somewhat disciplined quantities.
Someone give that man a beer.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a beer. Well, I'm gonna have a beer. I'm looking forward to tasting the two beers that I received from you guys. I'm pretty intrigued by the label.
Did it make it there on time?
Yes, just on. This morning, they were not here yet. I heard from Jordana, who was kind enough to receive them at her house. And then she, later in the day, she said, the beers have arrived, I'll run them over. And so
Perfect.
I went for a swim this afternoon. I came back and there they were in the refrigerator. So we've got them. But I'm intrigued by those. We'll talk about those later. But, the whole thing about the development of fruity hops, we're all familiar with reading specs, both numbers and descriptors of hop varieties as we're trying to evaluate them to use. And, it's kind of neat. It's like, it wasn't always the case when you would see things like passion fruit and blackberry and stuff like that used to describe the flavors and aromas that a hop would bring about. And, with those hop varieties, they were they were trying to appeal to people to get to introduce some of these flavors to their beers, but you know, it was a way of describing hops that we hadn't really seen before. And so you know, all of a sudden we had all this stuff to choose from, and it was really fun. And then it turned out that you know, there was an actual compound or a group of compounds that we could evoke and we could talk about in connection with some of these descriptors, and those were terpenes. And you know, I think you know, so much of the awareness of terpenes these days has to do with the appraisals of, you know, different weed varieties. You know, you hear about terpenes and you think of pot, but you know, they're terpenes, you know, for any of you who have read the book and all that stuff, you're familiar with all this sort of chatter, but you know, terpenes are part of basically every fruit and vegetable, every sort of organic kind of flavor and aroma compound that there is. And, you know, you read lists of the different substances that have whatever terpene in them, and it's just, they're endless. You know, and so when you read these days, you read a hop analysis, you'll see, you know, like percentage breakdowns of maybe half a dozen different terpenes that go into them. And while that's useful, while that's interesting, it doesn't tell the whole story. It's still a matter of feel and all that kind of stuff. And in the book, I compare it to listening to music. You know, there are all these threads that flow into what makes this composition, this aromatic and flavorful composition. And then you sort of make your decision based on your own tastes, your own inclinations. So you decide which hop varieties you're going to use based on that. And I just think that's a really, really interesting development that came along. And, you know, then the fruity varieties that, you know, everything went out the window once we started getting some of those crazy things from the Southern Hemisphere. You know, we got Nelson Sauvin, and we got Motueka and some of the other New Zealand varieties, and then Galaxy from Australia, and various other things too. And, you know, that just showed us that there were real fruity, specifically identifiable fruity components of some of these hop varieties that we'd never seen before. I remember one time judging at the Great American Beer Festival, or maybe it was World Beer Cup, doesn't matter. But, you know, I tasted a beer and I jumped up and I ran over to the next table, and Peter Buchart from New Belgium was sitting there. I said, "Taste this." And it was Nelson Sauvin, and it was so grapey, so Sauvignon Blanc kind of thing, you know, going on with it. There was a guy from New Zealand at the table, so it must have been World Beer Cup. And he said, "Oh yeah, that's Nelson Sauvin." That was my first contact with it. And it was amazing. It was an eye opener. So we had all these things to play with all of a sudden. But some of the other, jumping back to the way we developed IPAs at Elysian, you know, there was the Immortal. That was the development of the first one, the sort of flagship IPA. And then down the road, we made other things, you know, toward the end of my association there, like Space Dust and Dayglow. But one of the ones that I think was really interesting along the way was the Avatar Jasmine IPA. And the story behind that, which is also in the IPA book, was that my very first Great American Beer Festival judging session, I was, let's see, at the time I guess I was working at Big Time at that point. And I sat down and I looked around the table, and it was all these luminaries, you know, all these people that I knew from books that they'd published and, you know, whatever else their accomplishments were. And I was pretty intimidated. And I don't think I said a word on that whole panel. But, you know, one of the guys, Mark Dorber, who at the time ran the White Horse pub in Parsons Green in London, you know, just fell in love with one of the beers. And he said, "Oh, this beer, I love this. It reminds me of jasmine tea." And I thought, okay. And, you know, nobody else at the table really fell in love with it. And so it didn't move on to the next round. But it did strike a chord with me. And I sort of thought, gee, incorporating something like that in an IPA might be really interesting. And it took me a few years to do it. And I first brewed it on the small Tangletown system that we had at Elysian. And And we actually won a medal with that beer the first year we brewed it. First year we entered it. And just sort of jumping a little bit more into toward the present. Kim and I were in Hanoi a few years ago, and we went to a brew pub there that had really good beer called Pasteur Street Brewing, and they had a Jasmine IPA, and I tasted it. It was more hop forward, and their beers were really terrific. And we talked to the bartender and said, "Boy, who's your brewer?" And he said, "Oh, he's from Oregon." And you run into that all over the place, of course, but it was a neat beer. And then when I was writing the book, I wrote to that brewery because I had seen that they had a beer that incorporated tea, black tea, into an IPA. And so there are two recipes in the book that make use of tea. And one of them we did sort of synthesized like a Vietnamese sort of iced coffee kind of drink. And I wrote to them, saying, would you, consider giving me a recipe that I can publish in the book? And I said, I was in your place and I tried your Jasmine IPA and I really liked it. You might know that I used to brew one. The guy wrote back and said, "Oh yeah, I totally stole that from you." So that it's always fun to realize, how much contact we all have with each other with some of these things. But part of the reason that I talk about that beer is that, the hop character that appealed to Mark on that first IPA panel that I judged, reminded him of jasmine tea. And I talked about this whole terpenic content and all that kind of stuff of so many of these hop varieties. But there was a certain point at which, and the Jasmine IPA is one example of it. And I would say that first Sculpin grapefruit IPA is another example where the phrase I use, that's where the evocative became the actual. So you have hop varieties that remind you of jasmine, or that remind you of grapefruit, or that remind you of berries. And how much more of a stretch is it to actually use those materials to contribute to the flavor of, since we're talking about IPA, but other beers could qualify for it too. And so at that point, it's like, we've got all these hop varieties that are suggesting these fruity, and mostly fruity, but sometimes vegetal and herbal, spicy kinds of characters. And so how much of a stretch is it really to start using juniper or rosemary or lemon, alongside or in sort of concert with some of these varieties that remind us of those things? So I think that was sort of an important step forward too. So let's see, what other things do I have here?
Questions from your audience.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of that brings us more or less up to the present. And we all are aware of, the other trends that have existed. And I think it's probably better to just sort of treat them in questions from you guys and all that kind of stuff. But obviously we've got the whole hazy juicy thing going on. And we've got, a couple of years ago, we had brewed IPA that came and went, then we had some of the Scandinavian things. And, more recently, we've got what people are calling cold IPA, which is IPA brewed with lager yeast. And I've got opinions about that. And I brewed them myself, before all this sort of hoopla started. And we've got endless hop products and techniques that have developed in the course of the development of the style. We've got cryo hops, we've got different kinds of pelletization, we've got various other things. And we've got, different techniques like cooling down your wort in the whirlpool by 30 degrees before you add your late hops and all that kind of stuff. But, rather than get into all of that, because those are all big subjects, I would love to hear from you guys.
I mean, I've got a ton of questions, but I'm happy to start with the first one. So, Nick, you kind of mentioned in the beginning, like one of your first IPAs with Elysian was going, it was stable, and then new hops came in. And so over the course of a beer's, I guess, lifespan, as a brewer, would you incorporate new ingredients or new hops and still keep that beer kind of in that same trajectory or that same path? Or do you just kind of branch off and say, hey, this is too different? You know, this is a different beer for us.
Well, you do both. I mean, yeah, I did change the Immortal, but I tried to keep it pretty much the same beer with somewhat different hop character. But you're right. You know, if something is so, you know, and times change, and you've got to be willing to alter recipes, stay a little current, but also, you know, times change, and sometimes it's time to come out with a new beer when new things become available. So I would say kind of both. But you know, that's kind of how, you know, Space Dust developed, because, you know, people wanted, you know, there were new hop varieties that were available and we could do different things. And, you know, we used to dry hop the Immortal, but the dry hopping schedule was pretty rudimentary. But, you know, times changed. So we needed a new beer.
Got a couple Space Dust in the fridge. Go ahead, Mike.
So Dick, when I was first introduced to your product, my buddies were actually mixing beers, two of your same products, to create something special. And that really threw me into a loop. I was like, well, if you're doing that, why not buy a single beer that would incorporate it? But your beer just came off to such a great flavor that all my buddies were going crazy over it. And I was
What
like,
were they mixing? Can I ask you what they were mixing? Do you remember?
oh, we were drinking at the time.
Because we used to mix, sometimes we would mix the Space Dust with the Super Fuzz. And that was a fuzz duster.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yes.
I honestly don't think it was as good as either beer individually, but you know, what the hell?
It's like almost like a brown and tan. Is that what you get at the Scottish bars?
Yeah, right. The black and tan where you're floating one on another. Yeah.
Yeah, the black and tan. But yeah, that was ingenious, and I thought, wow, what a great way to push the product and get his marketing up. And you know, and then you come out with so many different flavors, and every time we go to the store, I'm actually seeing a different flavor of the, you know, of your product, of the Immortal. So I was like, wow, this is great, man.
Well, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I appreciate that level of inquiry.
Randy, I see you got a hand up.
Yeah, Dick. So what are do you have any examples of experimental beers that you really thought were going to work and for some reason they didn't? And can you talk about that?
Well, I would say, you know, I've done a lot of experimenting with unusual ingredients, and you know, I really have enjoyed sort of casting a net, you know, across cooking and cuisines, and you know, just research about different fruits and vegetables and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I have to say, you know, fennel is something that I really, really love. I love cooking with it and all that. But the beers that I've made with fennel, I have to say, are not that successful. It's still a flavor I like, but it's pretty bold. You know, I did at Magnolia, and I didn't even mention Magnolia. You know, that's something that I've been, you know, involved in for the last 3, 4, or 5 years in San Francisco. But, you know, I made a Belgian double with fennel in it that I thought would be really, really terrific. And boy, that beer sat around. You know, nobody was much interested in it. I would also say, you know, lavender is something that's really polarizing. I think some people really love the flavor of lavender, but to other people, it's like, it tastes like soap because they have that association with it, you know. And we know that there are palate divisions, you know, that some people just can't handle cilantro in food and other people love it. I love it, fortunately, but many people in my family don't. But sure, I could probably dredge up 1 or 2 other examples, but there are things that I think, you know, have really interesting flavors on their own that don't necessarily work in beer.
True.
I got a quick question. You mentioned cold IPAs. So where do you draw the line between a hoppy lager and a cold IPA?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's in the conception. I think it's the kind of beer you're putting together. I don't think, I honestly think the India Pale Lager thing is just not something that works. I think partly because I think those beers are mostly brewed at lager temperatures, fermented at lager temperatures. And I think the cold IPAs depend on being fermented warmer and getting some of the fruity character from the hops, that kind of stuff. I mean, yes, you're right. Technically, they are lagers, but I remember having a conversation with Vinny Chilurzo at Russian River, several years ago, where he was talking about, and I had done this myself. He was talking about how, in order to keep his lager yeast viable, because he wasn't brewing his Pilsner as often as he brewed the other beers, in order to keep it viable, he would brew an IPA with it every now and then, just to keep it going. And I thought, that's a good way of going about it. So, and so that's what I started doing at Magnolia too. And I thought it was funny a few years later when one of my brewers there told me about this new thing called cold IPA. And I said, do you remember the India Print series that we did a couple of years ago? That's what that was. Those were cold IPAs. But as I said, just to come back to that, I think it's in the conception. It's the kind of beer that you're drawing up, that you're intending to brew. And I think even though you're brewing it with a lager yeast probably at warmer temperatures, it's still an IPA. And yes, it's technically a lager. It's a bit of a hybrid, but you're going about it as if you're creating an IPA. It's what's in your mind as you're putting it together.
Thanks.
Yeah, good point. Tom, I saw your hand up. Unmute yourself, Tom. Let's see. I think I can unmute you, maybe.
Yeah,
There
that'll
we go.
probably help. Thank you. Yeah. So Dick, thanks very much for showing up. I'm reading your book through this for the second time, still fascinated with it, but I got to go back to the IPA story, shipping the beer over the seas. And my story, or my question, is twofold. One, there's a story about you along the same venue that when you left Elysian, you were invited back to the first board meeting and they started messing with your recipes and you got up and left in disgust.
Oh, that's apocryphal. That never happened.
Well, so yeah, I get that part. But so my question is really, as you've gone from Elysian on the other stuff, have you noticed any change in your brewing desires or styles?
Well, that's the kind of nebulous question that I really enjoy. Yeah, sure. I mean, my tastes change all the time. I think, you're also working with, I enjoyed being able to work with the Magnolia systems and take advantage of the different equipment that we had there and, augment things and change things and all that kind of stuff. But, I mean, I guess, you've always got to be changing. You gotta be fast on your feet all the time. If you brew the same beer forever, interest will wane, not just everybody else's, but your own. You've got to keep yourself, you've got to maintain your own interest. And so these days, I'm really interested in, Kim and I have a property in Sonoma where we're preparing to plant a bunch of trees and, grow all sorts of stuff. And it's been really fun to find things on the property, like persimmons. One of the recipes in the book is a persimmon IPA. And I brewed with persimmons and I really enjoy that. So that's really fun. And then this last spring, I gathered, or actually it was more like June, but I gathered redwood tips, like spruce beer type thing. I gathered the new shoots from the redwoods, and I haven't been able to brew an IPA with it yet, but I did brew a beer for my daughter's wedding in September. It was a pale ale using those. So I don't know. You got to roll with it. There's always new stuff. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
No, I just appreciate the reply. Thank you.
So I guess kind of going off that, I know that like, style and the value of styles, do you feel they're still valuable moving forward, or do you think they should be tweaked and adjusted? What do you feel about, style creep and everything that they talk about, especially, IPA is the biggest one that's constantly changing, but where do you feel that's going to go?
well, I think styles are important. I remember, I've had a lot of association with Peter Buchard over the years. And I remember when I first met him, this was quite a few years ago when he was, at New Belgium. And, he said that he thought he wanted to enter all of his beers at the Great American Beer Festival as American Pale Ale, because that's what they were. They were brewed in America. They were all very different, but they did not conform to classic styles. It was like, that's the contrarian Peter way of looking at things. I do think that styles are important to observe because we do come from a tradition of world brewing that has given rise to many different styles. And I think it's worth, recognizing that. And at one point I've made many times is that, the craft brewers started making beer, which was just like, okay, this is my beer. This is Dick's beer in 1977 or whatever it is. And that's all you need to know about it. And then after a while, people realized that in order to compare beers, in order to be able to compete, you had to conform to certain styles so that you could say, my Pilsner is better than your Pilsner and because of these beer benchmarks, that kind of stuff. And I do think that kind of comparison is valid. Of course, styles change, and of course, styles evolve, and of course, there are always new styles. I mean, just the proliferation of styles in the GABF style guidelines and in the BJCP guidelines, all that kind of stuff. Things change, and they have to be accommodated. But I guess I'd say both. I mean, I think it's really important to recognize classic styles because they're great beers. And it's a way of comparing one to another, but also to acknowledge that things change. And that, after a while, there are so many, say, hazy IPAs, which would have been anathema at a certain point because they were cloudy and all that kind of stuff. It's important to recognize that that's a new style and that those should be judged on their own merits and against each other too. So once again, I'd say both, but I think it's important to be strict, but it's also important to be able to roll with it.
Yeah, good point. I've got a question in the chat from Adam. He's asking, do you prefer biotransformation hopping over late dry hopping? Or any thoughts on that?
Well, I generally like late dry hopping. The biotransformation is something that we've all learned about over the last few years. It's really interesting, the effects that can have. And honestly, I have to say, I'm kind of an old guy. That's something that my younger former coworkers are working with. Steve Luke at Cloudburst is doing. I mean, he's really at the forefront of fiddling around with hops and doing all those kinds of things. And honestly, I've learned a lot from him. I spoke and he was given an award, sort of a culinary award, a couple of years ago. And I came down to Seattle and he had named me as his mentor to speak at the event. And what I said in my remarks introducing him was like, this whole mentor thing is a chronological accident because we've known each other long enough that I have learned, a whole lot from him as he is kind enough to say that he's learned from me. So, but in direct answer to the question, I feel more in control of late dry hopping than I do of that other stuff, but I'm not writing it off by any means.
Good. Todd, I saw you had a hand up. You're waving at me.
So this is kind of playing off the idea of hazy IPA. So like, what style do you think is like immensely popular and it's like it's about to hit its peak popularity, and what style you think is not as popular that should be promoted again?
Well, I don't know. I mean, promote it again. I mean, my quick answer to that is West Coast IPA all the way. But the whole hazy juicy thing, I love a lot of those beers. A lot of my old guy compatriots hate them. I see you're drinking one. Wasn't that something hazy that you were just drinking?
No, this is the Jasmine. This is the
Oh.
Avatar.
Well, that's kind of you. But anyway, a lot of my old guy compatriots are like, I won't brew a hazy IPA. I mean, one of my friends, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but he told his boss he'd rather quit than brew a hazy IPA. It's like, come on, do you want to sell beer or not? But I mean, when we were putting together a hazy IPA recipe at Magnolia, which eventually came out as the Cloud Cover, which is a like 8% double IPA. And unfortunately, you guys can't get it up there. It's only distributed in California. But anyway, we tasted through probably a dozen different hazy IPAs in cans. And I hate to say it, but like 2 of them were good. The rest of them just sat on the palate. They were too thick. I kind of insist on enough bitterness in a beer to maintain my palate's interest. And a lot of those beers just sort of sit there. I also prefer a beer with head on it. A lot of those things have so much crap in them that the surface tension is such that it can't maintain a head. That having been said, I drank some Juicy Bits tonight from Weldworks Brewing here in Colorado, and it's a hazy IPA, and it's wonderful. And there are wonderful examples of it out there. But in answer to your question, West Coast. I love the West Coast IPA. I like that bitterness. I like the bite that it has, and I like a brighter beer.
Mhm.
I mean, my friend Fal at Anderson Valley says that, a hazy beer can be good, but if it were bright, it would be better.
That's a great saying.
I like it.
Carbonation is good too.
Okay, I think I've covered questions in the chat and hands. Allison, go for it. Wait, unmute.
Unmute yourself.
There we go. I had to figure out how. I have 2 quick questions. One,
Allison and Mark, wait, how are you guys doing?
we're doing great. What do you think of cryo hops, and are you still brewing pumpkin beers?
Well, I think cryo hops are amazing. I love them, and I don't have a lot of experience with them. I learned about them from Steve because he was one of the first people to use them. He was using them so early on that the hop merchants were swearing him to secrecy. But he brought me in on the secret and showed me what he was doing with them. And I think they're terrific. But pumpkin beer. Well, I recently brewed a pumpkin beer. I brewed one this year, didn't brew any at Magnolia, but I did do a collaboration with Steve and Kevin at Wayfinder in Portland. And so Kevin used to, as you know, Kevin used to be up in Seattle brewing up in that area. And he got Steve to bring me in on this project. And what the element of it that intrigued me enough to want to do it was that the Wayfinder system is able to do decoction. And so he said, let's do a pumpkin beer where we decoct it. I was like, whoa, I've never done that. So we did that. And I also brought a bunch of Amburana wood, the Brazilian wood, to age it on. And it's called Corpo Seco. And I don't know how much is available, but it was mostly available in Portland. I have no idea how much of it went to Seattle. We're pouring some at Magnolia right now. But yes, I brewed one pumpkin beer this year and I've tasted it and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Kevin wanted to spice it, but I said, let's not spice it because I always appreciate a pumpkin beer that isn't spiced, that has some other really interesting treatment to it. I said, let's not spice it, let's not spice it with spices. Let's spice it with the wood, with the Amburana.
Cool.
Oh, that's good.
Hey, Dick, thanks for writing another really incredible book. We really appreciate everything that you've written for all of us home brewers and professional brewers. I wanted to tell a little story. Dick is an amazing inspiration to myself, and I met him a long time ago. I saw a lecture of his, and he was telling us about how he got recognized by commercial brewers. He would give his favorite commercial brewers some of his homebrew. And I took that to heart and gave Dick homebrew for a while, maybe a long time. And we had
He probably
many
still has some.
conversations. Yeah, and we had many conversations about that. And
We also
it was
brewed two
really,
pro-am. We also brewed 2 pro-am beers together.
yeah. And Dick, you've been an incredible inspiration. So I'm saying maybe an American saffron IPA.
What a great idea.
All right. Thank you, Dick, and say hello to Kim from all of us.
Well, she's waving from across the room right now.
Right on. All right. Thank you.
Well, I think Dick, we did send you a couple beers.
Yeah, let's taste the beers.
From Will and I. Go ahead and crack one, and then whichever one you choose, that person will get roasted first. It's either Will or I. So
Well,
it's random at this point.
Since you've said roasted,
Yeah.
let's taste the one that has roasted parsnips in it.
Oh, perfect.
Because
Mr. Ferdinand.
I had some of, I was going to talk about some of my, just mentioned briefly, some of my favorite recipes from the book. And to be perfectly honest, full disclosure here, when I published that book, I hadn't brewed a lot of those recipes. And at the time, Kim sort of called me on that. She said, "Can you publish recipes that you've never even brewed?" And I said, "Well, I know about how they'll turn out." But, some of my favorite recipes in there are the hot guava monster, which is a double IPA that has guava and habanero. I also like, and this is treading on, what I was saying earlier about fennel. It's a bit out there, but I really like the shiso IPA in there. I love rosemary and juniper, so those are a lot of fun too. And let's see, what was one of my other favorites? Well, I love the Avatar, but what?
Something with parsnips.
Well, and then one of my sentimental favorites, which I can't have. Before I say that, the cucumber squeeze that's in there is with cucumbers and Meyer lemons, which I think makes a really nice IPA. And I think one key part of that is saving the peels and putting them in the mash to get some of the astringency from that, so you don't waste any aspect of the cucumber, and then you puree the rest and put that in fermentation. But the one that I was about to say is the Mr. McGregor's one with the carrots, parsnips, ginger, and turmeric. And so I saw that one in the refrigerator with roasted parsnips, and I'm eager to hear how that was done. I'm going to run over to the fridge right now and grab those.
I'm going to go and grab mine too. Mine's in the garage. I'll be back.
I'm starting to feel like Will stole that recipe.
Easily
Will, I'll be
extracted
right
from
over to the
publishing.
garage. Will, I'm 10 minutes from your garage. I'll be right there.
I'm curious if it's going to take there's a Jellyfish Brewing in Georgetown has a like an all vegetable beer as well. I can't remember what it's called, like vegetable bowl or something like that. And it actually is not that bad.
Okay, well, that's high praise. Not that bad.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that scares most people off because of what they see, what's in it. But if you drink it, you're like, it's interesting.
Well, Justin's a good brewer, and Mark, who has a hand in that place, I used to work with it big time too. So I know those guys, of course. So this is what I'm opening. This is Will's beer. Let's see, Columbus, Citra, Amarillo. Okay, and then roasted parsnip, carrots, sage, turmeric, and cardamom. I'm eager to, because
walk us through it.
Sage is another one of those things that's sort of polarizing. Not everybody loves sage. I love sage in some aspects, but
So
It made a noise when I opened it. That's a good sign.
That's a good sign. Don't judge the clarity or the color. It's a hazy, but not for the right reasons.
Well, also, you know, honestly, these beers just arrived today, and Jordana was kind enough to rush them over here and put them in the fridge so that they would have some settling time. But I assume that they would not be like pristine in terms of that.
Yeah,
But it's not bad. It's a bit hazy. No big deal.
so obviously we were doing this. We had eclectic, and if we're gonna make eclectic beers, we should go all the way. And we were fiddling around with just some spices initially, with my friend Caroline, who's big into food. And we were mixing sage. We put some ginger in there, and ginger kind of like kicked off more of a chemical thing. So we went back to like some turmeric. And so I decided to roast some parsnips and carrots and I just basically split a 5-gallon batch into 2 little sections. So I took a couple pounds of parsnips, about 1.5 pounds of carrots, roasted them for 30 minutes. Then I pureed that up and put the turmeric in there too, pureed that up, and basically poured that into at the end of knockout with the secondary hops. So
did that make it into fermentation, or did that settle out?
it did go through fermentation, but it definitely it settled out pretty quickly. I don't know how much sugars it provided to but it did go through the fermentation.
Well,
And I knocked out, when I knocked out and had the knockout hops, that's also when I added the fresh chopped up sage. Yeah.
Because the Mr. McGregor's, you know, one thing that I kind of discovered in the course of, you know, doing all these recipes was the value of, you know, and I think I know I did. I sent some of the materials out to you guys, you know, a couple of months ago or whenever, just about some of the pieces of equipment that I found that were really valuable, you know, like the masticating juicer. You know, that's how I incorporated parsnips and carrots into the Mr. McGregor's in the book, you know, because I just wanted to get the juice out of it, and you don't get a lot of juice out of parsnips. I'm sure you can understand that. But I think, and also what you did with roasting those things and getting the caramelized sugars, I think was probably, I mean, we haven't even tasted the beer yet, but I think that's a really, you know, that's a great idea to do that. I wanted to get the juices, and, you know, you get a lot of juice out of carrots. I think for a 7-barrel batch of that beer, I juiced 50 pounds of carrots and 25 pounds of parsnips. And there was a lot of juice for the carrots, but, you know, I must say, you know, for 25 pounds of parsnips, I maybe got a pint of juice, but it's intense. You know, that's the great thing about parsnips. They have that great sort of white pepper, sparkly flavor. But when I smell it, I get mostly I get herbs. So I'm tasting it now. Sage is there, definitely. Some cardamom in the background. I think those are both nicely restrained. I think sage can be overdone really easily, you know, both in cooking and in brewing. I'm not, let's see, am I getting parsnips and carrots? Probably. It's a very solid beer. You know, it's got a very heavy, you know, like when I say a heavy palate, I don't mean, you know, cloying or hard to drink, but it's a ponderous, it's a powerful flavor. How strong is this? Not strong.
It's really not that strong in alcohol, but I think I would initially, you know, this is the first time I did it. It's a one-off. It was a 2.5 gallon batch. I would bring back the spices a little, though. I do like them in the nose. I think they're a little heavy.
You mean you would back off of them?
Yeah, just a little for me.
I'm not sure I would.
Okay.
I mean, this would be something that you could sell at a brewery in the fall and the winter time. This actually has all those fall winter flavors. I really like it.
Absolutely, I like it too.
So I think the mouthfeel I'm getting, like I'm not saying the heaviness, but like the mouthfeel I'm getting, is that from kind of the vegetables you added, or was it like the grain bill that gave it a heavier?
So I did the same grain bill with all these beers that we all did. So it's a pretty
Yeah.
light grain bill. If I remember, it's just basically half pills, half
Yeah.
2-row, and a little tab of carapils, like 5% of carapils. So
Yeah.
so yeah, but there is like the vegetables did provide a lot of mouthfeel and a lot of body to overall to the beer. I did buy a little carrot juice, and I was thinking about, at bottling time, just topping it off with some extra carrot juice, but I never got around that. I didn't channel that much of my inner Allison joy.
I don't think
to do that.
I don't think that's a sin to do that kind of augmentation. Like there was a beer I used to make with yuzu, which was a Belgian pale ale brewed with yuzu. And I used to add yuzu juice, at the finish before kegging it out, just to brighten it up a little bit. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, I think you're right. I think you're getting mouthfeel from the carrots and the parsnips, and it's a nice beer. But it does drink a little heavier than what I'm seeing with the numbers here. But that's okay.
So Dick, do you have some place to get yuzu juice for cheap? Because that stuff's expensive.
Not cheap, but I did have a yuzu source. I could probably dig that up and find it for you. It's not cheap, but I did. The good thing is that when I first started brewing with yuzu, I'd read about it in a New York Times article by a fruit writer whom I really love. His name is David Karp. And so he used to write, I don't know what he's doing now, but he used to write about obscure fruits that he had just fallen in love with. And I read about yuzu, and I'd never heard of it. And nobody had ever heard of it. And so I thought, well, I want to brew a beer with that. And so at that point, in Seattle, there's a Wajimaya, the Asian supermarket. And I used to be able to buy small bottles of yuzu juice there, which was imported from Japan, and small containers of yuzu peel. And that's how I started using it. And I talked to the produce guys at Uwajimai, and I said, if you ever get fresh yuzu in, call me up. So they called me up, and I did brew a version of that beer with fresh yuzu from them. And it was like, yuzus are really small. And I think I spent like $8 per yuzu. It was super expensive. But the great thing is now yuzu is grown in California. I've made a bunch of beers with yuzu, and I bought, I can buy it by the case, and it doesn't cost much more than other citrus fruits, because it's grown here. And so, it's like, this is great. I feel like that was a tangent.
No, not at all. Because it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned that because I remember I'm pretty sure you wrote that in your book because I followed that path because I live in Seattle. So I go to Wajimai all the time, and I'm looking for Buddha Hand because I'm a huge fan of Buddha Hand. And I had to ask for the produce manager so he could let me know when it was coming in, so he can let me know when it was going to show up.
But you can get Buddha Hand puree.
Wait, what?
Yeah. No, I really like the peel. So I've made simple syrups with it. I like the peel because it has like a really great fragrance. Hopefully, unfortunately, my beer didn't show it, but yeah. I agree. The peel's wonderful, but peeling it, that's
a pain. Oh, it's awful.
But I was delighted that we were able to get Buddha Hand puree. We made an IPA with Buddha Hand called Shimstock, which was a Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance reference. That was really good. What? But anyway, so yeah, no, I love Buddha's Hand. It's delicious.
It took me it took me an hour and a half to zest a Buddha Hand. but I made a really great mead with it.
So Dick, beer number 2.
Beer number 2.
See, I think Liche.
That made a noise too when I opened it. That's a good sign. So this is, let's see. Oh, this is the one that has a whole bunch of different hops in it, many of which are Southern Hemisphere. It's a double IPA. Oh, with white grape juice, right?
Beautiful. That was mine. So I really got into the Southern Hemisphere hops, particularly in like some session beers I like to brew, just because it gives you a lot more like aromatics and flavor outside of, looking for alcohol content or mouthfeel. But at the same time, I'm kind of getting into wine a little bit. So it's like, how do I start to merge the two? But we'll see.
So I'm getting a grapey aroma, which is nice. A little bit of, some sort of little ethyl acetate off of it. When I first smelled it, I was getting what I first identified as cheesiness, which I thought might have been hops, but no, I think that's just the grape. I think that's the grape. I do love combining. I haven't made enough of them. I do love combining grapes and beer. When I left Elysian, we were partway through. We were working with a winery group, and we were going to make a whole bunch of like beer wine sort of hybrid beverages. We were going to call it the Anathema series, because so much of what brewers do, winemakers don't want to do, and so much of what winemakers do, brewers don't want to do. But obviously, Vinny has been an inspiration with sort of marrying the enterprises of both of those things. And I made a Berliner Weiss with the tiny little Verjus grapes that are trimmed off the vines, that are not going to go into the wine. But so this is a big beer.
Yeah, it's big beer. There's actually white grape juice concentrate I put into the secondary. And the reason for that is the first time I put it in the primary, it went nuts and it was a little too alcoholic. I didn't like that batch. Other people did, which I was surprised.
So you think there's residual, well, it does seem like a lot of residual sugar in there.
No, not too much.
And it's pretty bitter. I mean, what do you think the IBUs are in this beer? It's pretty bitter.
I think they're around 60 to 70. I don't have my tablet in front of me. Not too bad.
Yeah. No, I enjoy it. It's a commitment.
Yeah, it's a commitment. It's a commitment.
That's an interesting statement.
Well, what I would do is I'd add something else to bring, it's solid from everything that you've introduced, including the bitterness. But I think it might need, like some sort of other treatment to sort of lighten up the effect, like give it some ethereal aroma or something that, offhand, I'm not sure what that would be, but grapes, what goes well with grapes?
High carbonation.
Thyme.
Yeah.
And I don't mean T-I-M-E, but T-H-Y-M-E.
Yeah.
I love that aspect, something like that. I remember a wonderful time sort of, speaking of hybrids, it was like a mead type beer, like a honey beer that Kim and I visited these guys in Catalonia when we were living in Barcelona back in 2010. And it was these three guys. What was their brewery called?
Clandestine.
Clandestine, right. It was three guys, and two of the three guys still had full-time jobs as you know, they were honey, they made honey. You know, they were apiarists, and they had a hillside that they showed us that was full grown all time, nothing but thyme on this hillside, and they made this mead beer with thyme, and it was so good. I think this could use some time.
We'll try that. Grab some time from downstairs.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, I think Will had one other Lychee beer that should have been in that box from you, Dick. And then
I only got these two.
You better talk to Jordana.
Well, I could be wrong. Let me look in the fridge. Maybe I thought I just had 2 bottles of each, but let me look. And believe me,
Jordana stole a beer.
I am not going to talk to Jordana in anything trick because she did me a solid bringing these out.
Hold out the time.
Yeah, I'm about to go put some time in this.
Yeah, let's put some time in, see what happens.
While Dick's away, can you make honey from grapevines? Like, I mean, do they have flowers?
I don't think a grapevine has flowers.
They don't have flowers.
They have grapes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I found the beer. You're right. I had the beer.
So Lori, you put some time in that. Did it make a difference for you?
I just put some thyme in it and it really lifts the aroma. And then the flavor, I think I got a little too much in there because it's like all thyme in the flavor, but on the nose, it's really nice.
And Jesse, I wanted to let you know that we're growing lemon thyme in our food forest, and I've so wanted to make a beer out of it, and now I'm very inspired. Thank you.
Oh, happy to share. Happy to
11 times is amazing.
collab on that one.
And I mean, one fruit that I had not had any contact with before we started this Sonoma project was pineapple guava. I mean, I mention it just because there's pineapple sage, but I can't wait to do something with pineapple guava. But now I'm opening the lychee. So how big is this? So also not that big.
I realize there's a typo. That should be 1012, not 14048 on the finishing gravity there. Lori sent that to me. I was like, my rush to bottle beer and get out to the Husky football game. I didn't look too closely at my labeling on Saturday morning.
Yeah, that's not very fermented, is it? If it only gets... Okay, well, I'm opening it now.
So on this one, again, I split the batch. So they both had the Columbus, they had the Citra at 10. And then I kind of cheated with this. I just put a little lactose in. I think about 4 ounces.
That's not cheating. That's not cheating. That's okay.
Okay. Well, in 2.5 ounces. And then I just use.
We're not trying to make delicious beer. I mean, we are trying to make delicious beer. We're not trying to follow all the rules and all that kind of stuff.
That's called seasoning.
Seasoning. And I used some tart lychee concentrate that I had. So my initial thought when I thought Eclectic, I'd never really made a sweet fruity IPA, and that was kind of where I was going to go. But then, I went with parsnip, pumpkin, and all the other ones in the other half of the batch. So
this has a really nice perfumey aroma.
It's pretty good.
And Will, this is the 5-gallon batch you split into the 2, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I pretty much boiled the 5 gallons. And then after I added the bittering hops and the 10-minute hops, at the end, I racked 2.5 gallons over. And that's where I added like the finishing hops and sage here and parsnip and stuff here, and then some lactose in the other one. And I put the concentrate in after kegging. So
I think it's just a great comparison to like taste this beer against the one with the vegetables in it.
It
To really
is.
see like the mouthfeel and that just even the sight of the glass.
So what was your thinking? Why did you put the lactose in?
just to give a little sweetness, a little to support with some mouthfeel and kind of add some flavor. I wanted it to be present, but not over the top, you know, and to back up some kind of the tartness. I know we were in Asheville this summer and had a delicious New Belgian, the sour IPA, which was sharp.
Yeah.
I was looking at that thing. I was like, there's no way that could be good, but it was amazing. It was sour.
Oh, it is good. And
Amazing.
also, you know, like when it comes to lychee beers, you know, for me, the tart lychee that New Belgium makes is like, that's the best one. It's so good. I'm not sure the lactose helps the lychee, you know, come forward. I got excited when I read that there was lychee in it, because I thought, oh, I love that sort of sharpness and all that stuff. I think the lactose kind of blunted it.
Well, I can redo it.
Yeah.
I like the flavor. I think it turned out good.
No, I like the flavor too. Well, redo it. Yeah, that's what we're doing. We're just making beer. We're not delivering babies.
No, it's not brain surgery.
Can't do that again. Yeah.
We can redo making babies.
Delivering babies.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just out of respect for your time, Dick, does anyone else have any questions for Dick? I know we've got a couple other beers that we're gonna sample around for a few that didn't get shipped to Dick, but locally we kind of shared around. Any other questions for our special guest tonight? Randy, I see a hand up.
Yeah, so I thought of a dumb question to ask Dick, so I'm sure he'll appreciate it.
I love those.
Okay, so Doc pulls up in the DeLorean and he says, Dick, you're a mate. I really appreciate your beer. I want to take you back to any time and place in history so that you can provide some influence on the development of the brewing industry. Where do you want to go? But he only has enough plutonium 842 or whatever it is to make one trip and get you back.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, there's, you know, like influencing history. I mean, you're right. There's the butterfly's wing and all that, but I don't know. I mean, I would be tempted to just use it to try to get a window on, you know, one of the most, you know, some of the most amazing sort of occurrences in brewing history. Like I've always been intrigued by, you know, the coach ride that, what's his name? Emil Jakobsen took, you know, between, you know, the brewery in Vienna and the brewery in Copenhagen to take the lager yeast up there and isolate that. Influencing brewing history. Wow. I'm not sure any of us should be bestowed with that kind of power. Boy, I mean, it's tempting just to think about bringing a more flavorful and fruity hop variety to a previous era to see what they might have done with that. That's maybe a stupid answer. It's an excellent question. And I think it bears more thought than I'm able to give to it right now. But yeah, fun.
Don't worry, we'll jump on line and update Seattle Times and says Dick Cantwell says.
Yeah, I saw your hand go up there in the background.
Real quick, so it's not a question. I mean, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the Eclectic IPA book. And actually, the thing I like the most about it actually is the tables, because when we were looking at making Eclectic IPAs, I was really trying to find a way to emulate Elysian's Hansel and Gretel. It's actually probably one of my favorite beers, but that's not an IPA, that's a Pilsner. And I got ready to get
But
Oh,
just let me jump in.
all
and
right,
say,
good.
if you want ginger products, the Ginger People. It's a company. They're called the Ginger People, and they have ginger juice and whatever else. But through them, that's how I learned about the masticating juicer. Juicing ginger is the way to go.
See, I stayed away from making my gingerbread because I was reading your book, and it's like basically you were talking about how ginger reacts with the hop flavors. I went, oh, maybe I should stay away from that.
Right. Juice the ginger.
Okay.
Hey, Dick, we hope to see you at the Strange Brew Fest this year.
Oh, when is that? February?
It's in early February this year.
Yeah.
I know you'd like to pop in there occasionally, so.
Well, I do occasionally. We'll see. I don't know.
Right on.
Would love to see you guys.
Hey,
Yeah.
well, we'll have to come down. I really need you to autograph the book.
Happy to do that.
So we'll come and see you.
Yeah, that would be great.
Cheers, Dick.
Well, thanks everybody. Thank you all for showing up and bearing with me as I still feel bad about not being there last time, but I'm glad we got a chance to do this tonight.
Thanks so much.
No, thank you.
Thanks
very
much. So much.
It's great.
Really appreciate you. Hi, Ken.
Greatly appreciate it.
It's great.
Yes. Big thank you, Dick. For those of us that have a couple other beers, if you guys want to hang on to the call, then we just do a quick round robin. I think Will and I already gave our predispositions, but thank you again, Dick. Really appreciate it. And yes, just the local legend is just amazing to have on our call. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad it worked out. Thanks. Good to see you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hope to
Yeah.
see you again.
I'm still going to promote the story about you walking out of the first board meeting.
Sure.
No, Freeberg. No.
Actually, the truth of it is I didn't show up to our last board meeting because I had been steamrolled, but that's the last I'll say about that.
Yeah,
Close enough.
we'll leave that.
Thanks very much, Dick. It's
Okay.
been great.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Dick. Appreciate it.